mountain bike industry can be perplexing at times. For many years we were told about these so-called do-it-all hardtails, but then are faced with subcategories within subcategories. I mean downcountry, what the hell is all that about? Some people on the other hand say there's no such thing as a do-it-all bike, Husqvarna being one of them. What is the actual difference between a 150mm travel bike and a 180mm? What sets them apart? What can one do that the other cannot? Well, today we have an all-mountain bike and an enduro bike. Chris, what would be your ultimate enduro and all-mountain ride?
I think around 15 to 20 miles of tech uphill, tech downhill, bit of trails linking it together, some nice single track. I'm sure you got something lined up for us today, Steve.
And some jumps, which I'm not going to do. So what we have here then are two Husqvarnas, the iconic brand from Sweden. One is 180mm travel and the other 150. Now that's 30mm difference between the two bikes.
Yes, we have one enduro bike and one all-mountain bike, both with very different riding styles intended. But we're going to head down into the woods and take a look at these bikes in really fine detail.
The point is, each of these bikes has a specific task in hand, but how much can 30mm really make? And we're going to try and disentangle this with a mix of tasks. And before we knew it, me and Chris were already at the trail side. Hey listen, so 180mm travel, 150mm travel,
Yeah.
A little bit of tech here. Do you think one of these bikes will be at the advantage over another?
I'm favouring your bike and your skills on this one, Steve, I think.
But did you know this bike is actually a little bit slacker and lower than that one? So
Really?
I'd say that one might be at the advantage.
A bit more, yeah, maybe steep head angle. Let's give it a
Dive
go,
in.
shall we?
It is pretty tech, this.
Oh, you're all right. Yeah, it's got it. Oh, boosting then or trail?
Trail.
It's a bit harder than it looks.
Try the easy gear.
Yes. Easy.
So folks, in our little techie challenge, I think both bikes came out equal. I think it came down to gear choice and mode. I was in trail and in first gear. What were you in?
Trail mode and second gear, so yeah.
So
pretty
same
comparable.
set on these bikes, so yeah, nothing in it. Time now then for an overview of the two bikes. Well, they're all alloy chassis, come in 4 sizes. They house the Shimano EP8 motor, reliable motor, kicking out a massive 85 Nm of torque, which means it's one of the most powerful in the e-mountain bike world. And also, both have 630 watt-hour batteries for good range. Now, my bike here is the Mountain Cross. It's, as I mentioned, 150mm travel. This has got a 29-inch wheel up front and a 27.5 on the rear. Now, the nature of this bike, as Husqvarna point out, is a medium travel full suspension eMTB, likes to climb technical trails as well as it descends them, partial to a gnarly trail or two, and perfect for big open mountain adventures.
Yes, and the bike I am riding is a Hard Cross 8. Now this is 180mm travel front and rear. And it's rolling on 27.5 wheels front and back. Now Husqvarna say this is a long travel, gravity fed, descent loving bike. Happiest punching out gnarly trails all day long, either at the bike park or out on the mountain. Very much an enduro bike.
But how do you know which bike you need when, let's face it guys, enduro and all mountain is actually pretty much the same thing, right? Well, kind of, but Enduro certainly has become more of the harder hitting, slightly more gravity-based sport, whereas all-mountain doesn't always need quite as much travel. A bike that needs to feel the edges of the single track more than the edges of the big lumps of rock. We soon rocked up in a rut to discuss just this. I have seen no end of people on motor enduro bikes sweating and swearing trying to get up this, because it is very, very difficult, right?
I'm not surprised. It's super technical. I mean, some of these rocks and roots, and the ruts are so deep as well.
Yeah, but the great thing with an e-bike, you can possibly ride it, but you can push it a lot easier than how many kilos, like a 100 kilo motorbike?
And the rest, I think. I think, to me, Steve, this looks way more fun coming down. It's like the ultimate rock garden. I'll tell you what, you go up, I'll come down.
It's a deal. But how do you know just what type of rider you are? Well, today we're going to try and help you answer those questions, and we'll begin with some very broad generalizations here, which will apply to all eMTBs, not just the Huskies. Whoa! That's pretty full on, wasn't it?
It was pretty full on, so deep some of those ruts.
Yeah, but I think pretty evenly matched, both up and down that which is ultimately a riverbed, pretty much, wasn't it, really?
Yeah, I was loving the 180, comfort blanket on some of those bigger hits. A couple of holes I hit in succession, and I mean, if I didn't have that big travel, it could have got pretty nasty, I think.
Well, you say that. I mean, 150 mil on here, but a 27.5 wheel mix compared to 27.5 front and rear on that.
Could be making a difference, I suppose.
It's still in the balance, isn't it?
For sure.
We continued our way, putting in the miles, pulling up some tough gullies, rocking down some, well, riverbeds basically. And as much as both bikes are equally adept, it's important to understand there are some very fundamental differences to these bikes. Now, difference number one is the amount of travel. Now, 180 mil is going to be more comfortable, and it's going to allow you to take much more of a beating than 150 mil. And also, that long travel, believe it or not, will be more comfortable on the longer rides, simply because it's softer.
And difference number two is the wheel size, and that's it. They're simply just different. 27.5 wheel, it's just going to feel a little bit more livelier in the turns versus the 29er. That's going to smooth out that rough terrain and give you a little bit more grip in wet conditions.
And the third basic difference between these two bikes is actually the geometry, in particular the sizing. And don't think that this is simply a shorter travel version of that, because it's not. Two and a half hours in, and one hell of a sausage roll.
Bad boy, isn't it? Look at the size of that thing.
I know. But we've used two bars, but in terms of which bike has got the upper edge, I don't think either have. And I think it's going to take some pretty hefty downhill situations and maybe some jumps to maybe separate the two bikes.
Yeah, I think for sure on the trail, I think given the conditions as well and the speed we're traveling at, it isn't, crazy speeds. And as you say, it seems pretty level table so far.
I think so. So I think we need to dive off this hill into the valley and head for the bike park.
After a sausage roll, right?
After this sausage, it's bloody good sausage roll.
So how do these two bikes compare when it comes to jumps and drops? Well, we've done back-to-back runs here at Forest of Dean on the Black Run, hitting a few sizable jumps and drops, and there is definitely a difference between the two. Firstly, I want to talk about travel. Well, the 150 bike, yes, on paper, it should be the better jumper out of the two, and it is if you've got the skills to pay the bills. But when things get out of shape, you definitely want that comfort blanket of the 180 travel bike. And I think if you're going to be pushing the limits when it comes to jumps, that bigger travel option is definitely the one. Then there is the wheel size. Of course, the 150 bike is a mullet setup, 29er up front, 27.5 out back. And of course that comes in great when you're getting a little bit out of shape or there's some braking bumps on those landings. That 29 is going to roll over it. Whereas the 27.5, yeah, it does it, and it's a lot more nimble and agile in the berms and the jumps as well. If you want to pull some shapes in the air, 27.5 is definitely the way to go front and rear.
Wow, that was a busy morning out in the muddy woods. We've now transitioned to a trail centre, and we're going to focus on some of the finer detail of the handling characteristics of both these bikes, beginning with corners. Now, wow, don't they look great there in that sun? Now, the 150 bike has got a shorter chainstay than the 180. It's also lower bottom bracket, which means the handling and the weight distribution is going to be different on both these bikes. Also, this bike has got slightly more expensive brakes than Chris's bike, which means a difference in control entering the corners, which is actually another important factor, because if the entrance and exit to those corners is rooty, then maybe Chris's bike with 180mm travel might offer a little bit more control. The fourth difference then, now we've already spoken how geometry affects sizing, but also affects the handling of the bikes too. Now, in as much as there are some similarities between the two bikes, there are some big differences. Now, similarities include such things as the C-tube angle here. It's 76 degrees, which means you can centralize your body weight when you're climbing, which is a good balanced position. But there are some differences. The first one is that the head angle is actually slacker on the Mountain Cross compared to the Hard Cross. And the Mountain Cross, as I mentioned earlier, has got a shorter chainstay compared to the Hard Cross, which is slightly longer, which on paper makes that bike a slightly better climbing bike as well.
Here now.
So what does that mean for you, the rider? Well, it means that simply that the geometry is different on both bikes, and you need to adapt your riding style to cater for the geometries. It simply means different weight distribution on the both bikes. Now, another big difference in the feeling and the handling of these two bikes is related to the travel, but in particular the fork. Now, I've got a 36 fork in this, Fox 36, whereas Chris has got 38. So there's going to be a difference in the comfort through horrible roots and rocks, or maybe down in the bike park further down. Chris, how did it feel down in the bike park, you know, the 36 compared to the 38?
I did actually notice a bit of a difference between the forks there. It wasn't quite as stiff as the 38. You know, that 36, you could feel it, especially on that last hip jump. Landing's quite short and it's a bit rough. You do notice that stiffness difference.
Yeah. But what Chris Smith does on a bike in the air is quite different to what most people do. Now, I actually like the feel of the 36, and combined with the 29-inch front wheel through route sections such as this, it really does carry speed pretty well.
And another difference is going to be the componentry on the bike. Starting up top, 780mm wide bar, 40mm stem. Slowing me down, I've got Shimano twin piston brakes, which aren't quite as pimp as Steve's XT versions. And the gearing on this bike, I've got a 1052 cassette with a Shimano XT rear mech. And wheel wise, I've got the DT Swiss rims wrapped with Maxxis Minion 2.6 tyres front and rear.
Now, on the Mountain Cross, as Chris mentioned, I've got a slightly more bougie XT cassette on there, but nevertheless, it is the same ratio, 10:51. So in terms of climbing ability, you know, they are equal. I've also got some slightly more expensive XT brakes in here, Chris.
I've noticed that, I might be taking those levers.
In terms of the bar and stem, there's a 40mm on here with a 780 bar. But otherwise, Chris, they're actually quite similar. But what I was going to ask you, obviously those are differences. Oh, what I forgot to mention, guys, is there's a Fox damper on there with a remote reservoir, whereas it's an inline damper on the Mountain Cross. I wanted to ask you, Chris, about, you know, you've just been in the bike park.
Yeah.
How did it feel in terms of the agility and the manuals between these two bikes? Obviously, they're quite close in the weight, about 24 kilos, but you know, different geometry. Did they move around differently in the air?
Yeah, the thing I noticed mostly was, I think you got a slightly higher front end, that slacker head angle, and of course your tyre choice is one thing that is drastically different between the bikes. Like this is built for rolling speed, whereas yours is more about grip, isn't it?
Well, actually, I've got a non-stock tyre on here at the minute. I've got a shorty on there simply because, I mean, it was boggy in those woods.
It's horrendous, wasn't it?
Yeah, but what about manuals? Obviously, a slightly longer chainstay on that. Is it?
Yeah. I actually found your bike was more, you know, easier to manual actually due to that shorter chainstay. Obviously, you can get that weight back. Whereas this, once it was actually in the position, it took more effort to get there. But when it was in there, it's pretty similar, to be fair.
Okay. So what you're saying is it's all down to rider technique, really.
Adaptation, I suppose, jumping from one bike to each.
So, you know, we can agonise over the fine details of these two bikes. You know, the wheel size, the travel, the geometry, but ultimately it's rider adaptation and, you know, being accustomed to what you're riding, right?
Definitely, right.
But the bottom line, guys, is which bike do you choose? Now, I really think this bike is enough for me in the type of riding I do. 150 mil travel. I love the way that 29-inch wheel rolls over the roots.
Yeah.
I like the fact it's a little bit lower, it's a little bit slacker. I think it's a great all-round bike, but what about you?
I think for me, for what I do, I think this is a perfect platform. You know, you've got that safety net, that 180 mil travel. It's slack, but not like, you know, it's not super slack like a full-on downhill bike. It's kind of that middle ground. And I think those 27.5 wheels, for me, front and rear, that is what I love about this bike. I'm not a big fan of the mullet for what I do. Trail riding, yes, but for bike park, jumping around, 27.5 all the way.
So there you go, folks. Food for thought. Lots to take into account here. So I think ultimately it actually goes back to the Husqvarna description in the beginning of, you know, that being an enduro bike, this being an all mountain. It's actually as simple as that, isn't it? And you, the riders, need to sort of tune into the detail of where and how you ride. So please get involved in a discussion about whether you need 180 or 150 in the comments down below. Don't forget to subscribe to EMBN for more e-mountain bike content. But Chris, I think this is probably an argument that'll just rumble on and on, won't it?
Yeah, I think we're going to head down to the cafe and have a chat.
I thought you were going to say bike park, but there you go. I'm all for a bacon and sausage roll. Let's do it.